Henry lived in a place where the horizon stretched endlessly, where the sky painted itself in soft shades of pink and orange at sunrise and deep purples at sunset. His ranch was far from the nearest town, hidden behind rolling hills and dense clusters of trees. The land was large, wild, and beautiful, and he had learned to live with its rhythm, its challenges, and its quiet lessons. For years, he had lived alone, and over time, solitude had become both his companion and his teacher. Henry's mornings always began early, long before the sun rose fully. He would swing his legs out of bed, the wooden floor cold beneath his feet, and pull on his boots. The smell of fresh hay and the crisp morning air greeted him as he stepped outside. There was a sense of peace in these quiet hours, a kind of serenity that only solitude could offer. The gentle lowing of cattle, the soft rustle of wind through the trees, and the distant song of birds were sounds that filled his world. He often felt that nature spoke to him more clearly than people ever had. Every day on the ranch followed a rhythm Henry had perfected over the years. He tended his cattle with care, checking each animal for signs of illness or discomfort. He mended broken fences and repaired gates, ensuring that the animals remained safe. Sometimes, he would ride out into the fields on his old horse, feeling the wind on his face as he surveyed the vast landscape. The work was hard, but Henry took pride in it. He knew that his hands, calloused and strong, were part of the story of the land. Each nail hammered, each fence fixed, each animal fed was a mark of his dedication. Henry's meals were simple, often prepared from whatever he had on hand. Breakfast might be eggs and toast, or porridge with a little honey. Lunch was usually something quick, eaten while sitting on the porch, watching the sunlight dance over the fields. Dinner, however, was always a quiet, reflective time. He would sit alone, sometimes listening to the crackling fire in the fireplace, sometimes just staring into the night sky. It was during these moments that Henry felt both the weight and the beauty of his solitude. Despite the simplicity and routine, Henry was not unhappy. There was a contentment in knowing that he was self-reliant, that he could take care of himself and his land. Over the years, he had grown attuned to the needs of the ranch, learning to anticipate problems before they arose. The weather, the seasons, the behavior of his animals, they all became part of his life in ways that only someone living close to the land could understand. Yet, even in this contentment, there were moments of quiet longing. Sometimes, on particularly still nights, he would hear the wind sighing through the trees and feel a pang of loneliness that reminded him he had lived much of his life apart from others. Henry had not always been alone. Years ago, he had known companionship, laughter, and shared dreams. But life had its own plans. Perhaps it was loss, or perhaps it was circumstances that pushed him into solitude. But he had come to accept that this life was his own. At first, the loneliness had been heavy, almost unbearable at times. Nights had stretched endlessly, filled with silence that sometimes seemed louder than words, but gradually, Henry had found a rhythm, a way to fill the quiet with purpose. He discovered that there was a profound beauty in simple routines, in living each day fully, even without another person to share it with. One of Henry's favorite times of day was early morning. Just as the first light of dawn touched the earth, he would step outside, cup a steaming mug of coffee in his hands, and watch as the world slowly woke up. There was something magical in these moments, the soft glow of the sun illuminating the fields, the dew sparkling like tiny jewels on the grass, the distant mountains standing silent and proud. These mornings reminded him that life was vast, mysterious, and filled with wonders, even if he was the only one there to witness them. The animals on the ranch were not just his responsibility. They were his companions. Henry had a gentle way with them, a patience that had grown over years of observing their behavior. The horses would nuzzle his hand, the cows would follow him across the fields, and even the small birds seemed unafraid to come close. He often spoke to them softly, telling them about his day or simply whispering words of comfort. In many ways, these animals were a bridge between Henry and the world, a reminder that connection could exist even in silence. Despite the isolation, Henry was far from idle. He spent hours repairing old barns, clearing overgrown paths, and planting gardens that brought color and life to the ranch. Every nail he hammered, every seed he planted, was an act of care and hope. The work kept him grounded, gave him purpose, and reminded him that even in solitude, life continued to grow and change. He took pride in the small victories: a fence repaired before a storm, a calf safely born, a field cleared for planting. These achievements, though often unseen by others, were deeply satisfying. Henry's social interactions had become rare over the years. Trips to town were infrequent, limited to essentials like groceries or medical supplies. Conversations were brief, polite, and often left him longing for the quiet familiarity of his ranch. Yet, he did not resent these rare encounters. Instead, they reminded him of the contrast between his solitary life and the bustling world beyond. He had chosen this path, and while it was not without its challenges, it was also rich with moments that could not be experienced anywhere else. Evenings on the ranch held their own charm. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of red and gold, Henry would often sit on the porch, listening to the sounds of the land. The crickets would begin their chorus, the wind would whisper through the trees, and sometimes a distant coyote would call. These sounds, rather than frightening him, brought comfort. They were a reminder that life continued all around him, even if he was alone. In these moments, he felt connected to something larger, something timeless, beyond human company. Henry's solitude had taught him patience, resilience, and observation. He had learned to notice the smallest details: a change in the wind, a subtle shift in an animal's behavior, the first signs of spring in the fields. These observations were not just practical, they were deeply satisfying. They allowed him to understand the rhythms of life in a way that many people, caught in the noise of the world, could never experience. Solitude, he realized, was not emptiness. It was depth. It was awareness. It was presence. Yet, for all the beauty and contentment in his life, there were moments when Henry felt a quiet ache for connection. The laughter of children, the warmth of friendship, the simple joy of sharing a meal with someone, these were things he remembered fondly and sometimes missed deeply. But he never let these feelings overwhelm him. Instead, he allowed himself to feel them fully, and then returned to the work and rhythms of his day. In doing so, he discovered a balance between longing and fulfillment, between solitude and the subtle joys of life on the ranch. Henry had made peace with his life. He had built a world that was entirely his own, shaped by his hands, his choices, and his care. And yet, deep down, he knew that life had a way of surprising even those who believed they were entirely self-sufficient. He often thought about the unexpected, about the mysteries that might one day enter his quiet world, changing it in ways he could never predict. Little did he know, his life was about to take a turn, one that would bring warmth, companionship, and a sense of wonder that he had not felt in years. For now, though, Henry continued his days as he always had, rising with the sun, working tirelessly, caring for his animals, and walking the land that had become his home. He was a man of routine, of quiet strength, and of profound connection to the world around him. His life was simple, yes, but it was rich with meaning, and it was his alone. The solitude that had once been heavy now felt like a friend, a companion that had shaped him into the man he was. And in the distance, beyond the hills and forests, the world continued, holding the promise of change, of surprises, and of moments that would one day transform his life completely. Henry had grown accustomed to the quiet of his ranch, the familiar rhythm of work and solitude that had become his life. But one morning, as he walked through the fields checking on the cattle, he noticed something unusual. The soft soil near the barn had strange marks, like tiny footprints, carefully pressed into the earth. At first, he thought perhaps an animal had wandered in, maybe a small deer or a curious fox. But as he followed the tracks, a sense of curiosity and a little caution began to stir in him. The footprints led toward the edge of the clearing where a gentle slope met a cluster of tall trees. Henry's heart beat a little faster, not from fear, but from the sudden sense that something unexpected had entered his quiet world. He approached slowly, calling out softly, "Hello?" "Is someone there?" The only reply was the whisper of wind through the leaves and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. And then he saw them. 6 figures knelt on the grass, their presence serene and almost otherworldly. At first, Henry couldn't believe his eyes. They were human-like in shape. But there was something about their posture and calmness that felt different, almost sacred. Each one knelt quietly, heads bowed slightly, hands resting gently on the earth. The morning sun shone through the trees, catching on their hair and clothing in a way that made them look like part of the light itself. Henry's first instinct was caution. He had lived alone for years and knew that strangers could bring trouble. But there was something in the way they moved, gentle, unhurried, respectful, that made him lower his voice and take a careful step closer. Who are you?" he asked, his voice steady but filled with curiosity. One of the 6 looked up, and Henry noticed the warmth in their eyes. There was no fear, no hostility, only a quiet understanding. The figure smiled faintly and gestured toward the ground, as if asking Henry to come closer, to trust them. For a moment, Henry simply watched, unsure of what to do. He had never encountered anything like this before. The stillness of the moment was profound, almost sacred, and Henry felt a strange mix of awe and wonder. Slowly, he approached, keeping his movements calm and deliberate. "Are you lost?" he asked gently. The figures remained kneeling, their expressions peaceful, and one of them whispered something that Henry could not understand. It sounded like a song, soft and melodious, carried by the wind. Henry's heart felt lighter, as if the sound itself was meant to calm him, to invite him into something new. Henry stepped closer, offering a hand in greeting. He realized then that they were not threatening, not dangerous. They were simply seeking something, though he could not yet tell what. One of the figures rose slightly, bowing their head respectfully, and Henry felt a warmth spread through his chest. There was trust in their gesture, a silent understanding that no words could fully express. He led them to the porch, offering water in an old tin cup and some bread he had prepared earlier. They accepted quietly, drinking and eating with gentle movements, never rushing, never making a sound that might disturb the stillness of the morning. Henry watched them carefully, noticing the care in their actions, the way their eyes seemed to take in everything around them. The fields, the animals, the barn. They were not strangers to kindness, it seemed. They carried it in every gesture, in every glance. As they rested, Henry spoke to them in the calmest voice he could manage. "Where did you come from? Why are you here?" One of the figures tilted their head, listening, then gestured toward the horizon, as if to say they had come from afar. They did not speak Henry's language, but somehow, in the quiet, understanding passed between them. Words were unnecessary. Their presence alone communicated a sense of humility, of reverence, and of peace. Henry spent the rest of the morning showing them the ranch. They moved slowly, observing everything with curiosity and respect. The cattle seemed to sense the newcomers' calm energy, grazing quietly as if reassured by their presence. The horses approached cautiously, sniffing the air, and the 6 figures knelt again to stroke their muzzles gently. Henry watched, a strange feeling of joy and disbelief swelling inside him. It was as if his world, long, silent, and predictable, had suddenly become alive with wonder. As the day passed, Henry realized that these 6 were not ordinary visitors. They seemed attuned to the land in a way that was remarkable. They noticed the smallest details. A bird perched on a fence post, the way the sunlight reflected off a puddle, the pattern of leaves in the wind. Henry found himself explaining things he had taken for granted for years. How to care for the cattle, how to ride the horse safely, how to mend a fence so it would last through storms. And in their quiet listening, he felt the satisfaction of someone truly paying attention, of someone valuing not just his words, but his life and experiences. By evening, Henry had begun to feel a strange bond forming. The 6 knelt again on the grass as the sun dipped low, and Henry felt a sense of peace he had not known in years. Their presence was calming, soothing even the invisible edges of his long-standing solitude. For the first time in a long time, he did not feel entirely alone. He felt watched over, not in a frightening way, but in a gentle, protective way, as if life itself had sent these beings to him for a reason he could not yet understand. Night fell, and the ranch seemed transformed. The air felt softer, the stars brighter, the shadows less lonely. Henry brought them inside his modest home, offering blankets and a place near the fireplace. They accepted quietly, sitting together in a circle, sharing warmth without needing words. Henry prepared a simple dinner soup, bread, and fresh milk, and they ate with care, savoring every bite. Their presence made even this ordinary meal feel extraordinary, as if the simple act of sharing food had become a ritual of connection. Henry could not stop thinking about how these six had appeared so suddenly, kneeling in the grass with such serenity. He wondered if they were travelers, perhaps lost in the countryside, or if they had been sent for some purpose beyond his understanding. There was no fear, only curiosity, a desire to learn and connect. And though he could not explain why, Henry felt a quiet certainty that their arrival was meant to change his life. Over the next few days, Henry began learning their habits, observing their quiet routines, and understanding their ways of communicating without words. They were patient, gentle, and attentive, always moving with respect for the land and for each other. Henry found himself teaching them small tasks around the ranch, but he soon realized that they were teaching him as well. Teaching him the value of patience, of observation, and of living fully in the moment. Henry's heart, which had been closed for so many years, began to soften. He noticed small things, the way they laughed quietly when something amused them, the way they helped each other, the way they knelt in reverence at sunrise and sunset. Their gestures were filled with meaning, and Henry realized that he had forgotten how powerful the smallest acts of care and attention could be. By the end of the week, the ranch felt different. The air seemed lighter, the mornings more vibrant, the evenings warmer. Henry, who had spent years in quiet routine, now found his days filled with unexpected joy. The six newcomers had brought a presence that transformed his world, one of wonder, companionship, and the promise of connection. He began to understand that life, even after years of solitude, could surprise him in the most beautiful ways. And so, the rancher who had lived alone for years began a new chapter, one where the quiet fields and rolling hills were shared with six extraordinary companions. Henry did not yet know their story, nor did he know why they had chosen his ranch, but he felt a deep sense of trust and gratitude, knowing that his life, once defined by solitude, was about to become richer, fuller, and more meaningful than he had ever imagined. Days turned into weeks, and Henry's life began to change in ways he had never imagined. The six newcomers, whose presence had first startled him, were now part of the rhythm of the ranch. Each morning, Henry would wake to find them quietly moving around the fields, tending to tasks that needed attention, or simply sitting in the sunlight, observing the world with calm curiosity. Their silence was not empty, it was full of understanding, patience, and a kind of gentle communication that needed no words. Henry found himself talking to them more often, sharing stories of his past, the hardships of running the ranch, and memories of days long gone. The six listened attentively, their eyes reflecting a mixture of curiosity and empathy. Though they did not speak his language, their gestures, their smiles, and the soft nods of their heads made him feel heard and valued. For the first time in many years, he felt that his experiences and his life mattered to someone beyond himself. The newcomers also began helping with daily chores, each contributing in their own way. One would help guide the cattle to new pastures. Another would assist with mending fences, while another seemed to have a natural talent for calming the horses. Henry watched in amazement as they moved with precision and care, as if they had learned the ways of the ranch instinctively. It was not just their help that impressed him. It was the respect and gentleness with which they approached everything. Even the smallest tasks were done with care, turning routine work into something meaningful and graceful. Henry himself began to change. His mornings, once filled only with practical tasks, now included moments of shared laughter and quiet reflection with the six newcomers. He taught them how to milk the cows, gather eggs, and ride horses safely. In return, he found himself learning from them as well about patience, about seeing beauty in simplicity, and about noticing the small wonders of life that he had once taken for granted. Their presence reminded him that life was not only about survival or routine, it was about connection, care, and the joy of shared experience. The bond between Henry and the six deepened each day. He discovered that they had their own ways of showing affection and respect. When Henry was tired from a long day of work, one would bring him water without being asked. When the wind grew strong, another would help secure the barn doors. They never spoke in words, but their actions communicated more than language ever could. Henry realized that trust and care could exist without conversation, that presence and attention could create bonds stronger than words alone. As the days passed, Henry began to notice subtle changes in himself. He laughed more freely, smiled more often, and even began to feel a sense of anticipation each morning, wondering what small act of kindness or quiet gesture the six might offer. Nights, once long and lonely, were now filled with the warmth of companionship. They would sit near the fire in the evenings, sometimes simply watching the flames dance, other times performing small routines together, like arranging firewood or cleaning the porch. These moments, simple as they were, became the highlights of Henry's day. Henry also observed how the six cared for one another. If one seemed tired or hesitant, another would guide or support them. Their interactions were filled with mutual respect and kindness, and Henry found himself inspired by the harmony they shared. It reminded him that relationships were not only about words or grand gestures, they were about patience, understanding, and consistent care. He began to apply these lessons to his own interactions with the animals, treating each one with even greater attention and tenderness than before. The weather tested their bond as well. One afternoon, a heavy storm swept across the ranch, with strong winds tearing at the fences and rain soaking the fields. Henry, usually solitary and facing such challenges, found himself working alongside the six. They moved as a team, securing gates, protecting the animals, and ensuring that the barn remained safe. Their calm determination amazed Henry. There was no panic, no chaos, only coordinated effort and shared responsibility. By the time the storm passed, the ranch was intact, and Henry felt a sense of gratitude and pride that was deeper than anything he had experienced alone. Through these shared experiences, Henry realized that life could be fuller than he had ever imagined. He had lived years in solitude, thinking that contentment was enough. But he now understood that joy could be multiplied when shared. The six newcomers had brought energy, warmth, and laughter into his quiet world, transforming even ordinary tasks into moments of connection and meaning. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, not only in caring for the ranch but in nurturing the bond that had formed among them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned shades of pink and orange, Henry watched the six kneeling together in the field, their hands resting lightly on the grass. There was a ritual-like quality to the moment, a silent reverence for the land and for one another. Henry felt a deep sense of peace wash over him. He had once thought that solitude was his natural state, that this quiet life was all he needed. But now, he understood that companionship could enhance solitude. That connection could bring depth and beauty to life, without taking away the simplicity he cherished. Henry began to reflect on the lessons he had learned. He had discovered that true companionship was not about constant conversation or grand gestures. It was about presence, respect, and care. He had learned that patience could build trust, and that kindness, even in small acts, could create bonds stronger than words. Most importantly, he realized that life's unexpected moments, like the arrival of these six strangers, could transform a person in ways he had never imagined. The six newcomers also seemed to have an unspoken understanding of Henry's needs. On days when he was particularly tired or burdened by work, they would move silently to assist him, without needing instruction or direction. Their empathy was natural, intuitive, and it touched Henry deeply. He found himself opening up in ways he had not done in years, sharing memories, hopes, and even fears with these gentle companions who did not judge or interrupt, but simply listened through their presence and quiet attention. As the weeks turned into months, Henry noticed how the ranch itself seemed to change with their presence. The animals were calmer, the gardens more tended, and even the weather felt less harsh somehow, as if the land itself recognized the harmony that had formed. Henry took pride in these changes, but he also realized that the true transformation was within him. He was no longer a solitary man, simply surviving on a quiet ranch. He had become part of a small community, a family of sorts, bound together not by blood, but by care, respect, and shared experience. Henry's days now began with anticipation rather than routine. He looked forward to the quiet smiles, the gentle gestures, and the small acts of companionship that had become part of his life. He found joy in teaching the six, but even more in learning from them the patience with which they approached tasks, the care they took in every movement, the respect they showed for the land, the animals, and for one another. Their presence reminded him that even simple moments could be extraordinary when shared with those who cared. Henry also began to dream again. He had long set aside ambitions and hopes, believing that solitude was his destiny. But now, he found himself imagining new possibilities for the ranch, for his life, and for the bond he shared with the six. Perhaps there could be celebrations, shared meals, evenings filled with stories and laughter, even journeys beyond the ranch together. The future, once something he faced alone, now seemed open, vibrant, and full of potential. One evening, as Henry sat by the fire with the six gathered around, he realized that he had come to love this quiet, gentle presence as much as he had loved the land itself. The ranch, which had once been a place of work and solitude, had become a home filled with warmth, connection, and mutual care. He understood that life's richness was not measured by grand achievements or possessions, but by the relationships we nurture, the kindness we show, and the quiet moments of shared experience that make the heart feel full. Henry's transformation was not sudden, but steady and deep. The six newcomers had brought not only companionship but perspective. They had reminded him of the beauty in patience, the power of presence, and the profound impact of care and kindness. In their quiet ways, they had shown him that life could be more than routine, that even after years of solitude, connection was possible, and that the heart could expand to welcome joy, love, and shared purpose. By the end of this period, Henry no longer saw himself as a solitary rancher. He was a man surrounded by six extraordinary companions, each contributing in their own way to a life that was richer, fuller, and more meaningful than he had ever imagined. The ranch was not just land, animals, and work. It was a living, breathing home, filled with connection, warmth, and hope. And in this new chapter, Henry discovered that the beauty of life often arrives unexpectedly, quietly transforming the heart and creating bonds that last far longer than the years spent in solitude. Seasons changed on the ranch, but one thing remained constant: the presence of the six newcomers who had transformed Henry's life. What had begun as a quiet curiosity had grown into a deep, unspoken bond. Henry, once a man of solitary routines and measured solitude, now experienced each day with a sense of wonder, connection, and warmth that he had never imagined possible. The ranch, too, seemed to breathe differently. The animals moved with calm confidence. The fields were cared for with gentle hands, and even the air itself seemed infused with the quiet harmony of their shared lives. Henry's mornings were no longer solely his own. Each sunrise brought with it small, comforting rituals. The six would greet the dawn with kneeling gestures, as if acknowledging the beginning of the day, and Henry found himself joining them without thinking, his heart lifted by the simple act. Together, they would feed the animals, check the fences, and walk the fields. Tasks that once felt repetitive and lonely were now shared, and the ranch felt alive in a way Henry had never known. Every action, no matter how small, seemed to carry significance because it was part of a shared life. One morning, a gentle mist covered the fields, softening the edges of the world. Henry walked alongside the six, noticing how naturally they moved among the animals, how attentive they were to the smallest needs. He felt a deep gratitude for their presence. It was more than companionship. They had taught him patience, empathy, and the beauty of noticing what many might overlook. A calf struggling to stand received immediate attention, and a stubborn horse yielded quietly to one of their gentle hands. Henry realized that life on the ranch had become not just about work, but about care, connection, and harmony. As weeks passed, Henry observed the subtle ways in which their presence affected the land itself. Gardens flourished, crops grew taller, and even the flowers seemed brighter. He noticed that the animals, too, responded to the newcomer's gentle energy. Cows that had once been restless now grazed calmly, and the horses moved with a serene awareness. Henry marveled at this change. It was as if the land itself recognized the harmony that had formed, responding to the respect and care shared by all who lived there. Henry's heart, long shielded by years of solitude, opened more and more each day. He found joy in the simplest moments. A shared smile as they worked side by side. A quiet laugh over a small mistake. The comfort of their presence on long, chilly nights. The six had become a chosen family, not by words, but by shared experience and mutual respect. Their gestures, their patience, and their attentiveness spoke volumes. Henry realized that connection could transcend language, that understanding could exist in silence, and that love could be expressed through acts of care rather than spoken promises. One afternoon, Henry decided to teach them something special. He guided them to a hill overlooking the ranch, where the view stretched endlessly across fields, forests, and distant mountains. "This is my home," he said softly, gesturing to the land that had shaped him. He explained how he had worked tirelessly to maintain it, to care for the animals, and to live in harmony with nature. The six listened, their eyes following his every movement, their gestures conveying respect and understanding. Henry felt a swell of pride and gratitude, pride for what he had built, and gratitude for the companions who now shared it with him. Evenings on the ranch became a time of quiet reflection and togetherness. Henry would light a fire near the porch, and the six would gather around, kneeling or sitting close by. Sometimes they would simply watch the flames, letting the warmth and light fill the silence. Other times, they engaged in small, unspoken routines, arranging firewood, tending the garden, or preparing simple meals. These shared tasks, repeated day after day, became rituals that strengthened their bond. Henry felt a deep sense of belonging that he had never experienced before. For the first time, he knew what it meant to be part of something larger than himself. Henry also noticed how the six cared for each other. If one seemed tired, another would guide them or offer support. If one struggled with a task, another would assist patiently. Their interactions were filled with kindness, mutual respect, and quiet understanding. Watching them, Henry learned that the essence of family was not blood, but care, attention, and shared responsibility. The lessons he absorbed from their example were profound. The true measure of life was not possessions or accomplishments, but the depth of connection, the strength of empathy, and the willingness to nurture one another. One particularly memorable day, a storm swept across the ranch. The wind howled, and rain poured down, threatening to flood the fields and unsettle the animals. Henry, who had once faced such challenges alone, now worked alongside the six. They moved in harmony, securing fences, guiding the animals to safety, and protecting the barn. Their coordinated efforts and calm determination amazed him. He realized that life's trials, once daunting in solitude, became manageable, even meaningful, when shared with those who cared. By the time the storm passed, the ranch was intact, and Henry felt a profound gratitude for the presence of these six companions who had changed his life. As the months went on, Henry began to notice small, beautiful moments that seemed to define his new life. The way the six would kneel together at sunrise, as if giving thanks for another day, the way they cared for the animals with gentle patience, the way they moved through the fields in perfect harmony, each step deliberate, thoughtful, and filled with quiet grace. Henry realized that these moments were more valuable than anything he had ever possessed. They were a reminder that life's beauty often comes in subtle, quiet gestures, rather than grand events. Henry also began to dream again, a practice he had long abandoned in his solitary years. He imagined expanding the ranch, planting more gardens, perhaps even building a small shelter for travelers who might pass through. He thought about celebrating special days with the six, sharing meals and stories, or taking quiet walks together through the hills and forests. These dreams, once distant and improbable, now seemed achievable, for he was no longer alone to face the world. Together, they could create a life filled with meaning, connection, and joy. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of red and gold, Henry watched the six kneeling in the field, their hands lightly touching the grass, their heads bowed in quiet reverence. He felt a wave of emotion wash over him, gratitude for their presence, awe at the harmony they had created, and a deep, abiding love that went beyond words. In that moment, Henry realized that his life, once defined by solitude, had been transformed by connection, care, and shared experience. The ranch was no longer just land and animals, it was a home, a sanctuary, and a place of belonging. Henry's transformation was profound. He had become more patient, more compassionate, and more attuned to the world around him. The six had brought not only companionship, but perspective, teaching him that the heart could grow even after years of isolation. They had reminded him of the power of quiet gestures, the importance of presence, and the beauty of shared effort. Each day spent with them strengthened the bond, and Henry knew that his life would never again be the same. The ranch itself seemed to reflect this transformation. Gardens flourished under careful hands, animals moved with calm confidence, and the air carried a sense of peace and balance. Henry took pride in these changes, but he knew that the true transformation was within him. He had learned that life's richness was not measured by what one owned or achieved, but by the relationships nurtured, the kindness shared, and the moments of connection that filled the heart with warmth. In time, Henry's days settled into a harmonious rhythm. Mornings began with shared routines, afternoons were filled with care and work, and evenings became moments of reflection, gratitude, and quiet joy. The six newcomers, who had first appeared as mysterious figures kneeling in the grass, had become family in every sense that mattered. Their presence had brought laughter, warmth, and a sense of purpose that Henry had thought lost forever. One night, as Henry lay in bed listening to the soft sounds of the ranch, the rustling of leaves, the distant lowing of cattle, the quiet breaths of the six sleeping nearby, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He had lived years in solitude, believing that this was all life had to offer, but the arrival of these six gentle companions had shown him that even the quietest life could be transformed by connection, kindness, and shared purpose. He felt a deep, peaceful contentment, knowing that he was no longer alone. Henry had learned that life's beauty often arrives unexpectedly. The six had entered his world quietly, kneeling in the grass, and in doing so, had brought light, warmth, and companionship to his life. He realized that happiness was not something to chase or find, it was something created through care, attention, and the willingness to open one's heart. And in that quiet understanding, Henry found a joy deeper than anything he had known, a sense of belonging that made his heart feel full. The ranch, once a place of solitude, had become a home filled with life, laughter, and love. The six newcomers had brought harmony, joy, and companionship. And Henry had discovered the profound truth that connection could transform even the loneliest of hearts. Together, they faced the challenges of each day, celebrated the beauty of each sunrise and sunset, and nurtured a life that was richer, fuller, and more meaningful than Henry had ever imagined. In the end, Henry realized that life's most extraordinary gifts often come when least expected. The six, who had knelt quietly in his field one morning, had brought him a family, a purpose, and a joy that could not be measured. And as he watched the sun rise over the fields each morning, with the six by his side, Henry knew that he had been given a chance to experience life in its fullest, most beautiful form, a life filled with connection, care, and love.